Welcome to Passion for Sound, the channel dedicated to thorough and honest reviews of headphones, earphones, DACs, headphone amps, other components and accessories. Basically everything audio related except power amps and passive speakers. My name's Lachlan and my goal is to explore and discuss all kinds of audio topics, even the controversial ones, to help us all find more enjoyment from music. Thanks for watching and enjoy the video. Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. And today a look at the Audeze LCD-1. This is a headphone that I don't see talked about that much, and it's a bit of a shame because I think it's definitely a headphone worth considering. The LCD-1 is a $399 compact, open, planar magnetic headphone, and it's pretty unique in the sense that it is designed to be portable, but it's open and it's planar magnetic. It's also pitched more at those looking for a reference, mixing and mastering style headphone, so in many ways it's quite unique in the market, and therefore I'm really keen to share it with you today and talk about where I think it's great and where I think it maybe won't suit everybody. Now I started off by mentioning that this is a $399 headphone. What I don't then understand is why in Australia it's a $629 Australian headphone. And that completely changes where it sits in the marketplace, how it performs against other similarly priced headphones, and it's an area where I'm a little bit confused as to why the price is just so much higher here in Australia. It's not uncommon that happens, and I know Australia is not the only country where that happens, but it is a bit of a shame that its price is so heavily inflated in Australia because I don't necessarily know that it stacks up as a $629 headphone here in Australia, whereas as a $399 headphone, I do think it makes quite a lot of sense. But as always, we'll get into the comparisons and the detail around how it stacks up, how it performs, all of that's coming soon. Before we get there though, let's talk about what the Audeze LCD-1 is. As you can probably tell from this container here on my desk, it's a really compact headphone that comes with a hard case for carrying it between mixing studios, if you're traveling, between home and office, all sorts of different opportunities for transportable headphone use. I'm not going to call it a portable headphone in the sense that you probably wouldn't want to wear this when commuting because it is an open headphone. That means it's going to leak sound in and sound out of the ear cups, so it's not going to be ideal if you're on the train, if you're walking through the streets. You're going to have to up the volume quite a lot to drown out the background noise, and that's generally not a great idea for your hearing and also won't give you the best sonic experience. So this is very much a transportable headphone that comes in a case that's going to protect it when you're moving between one kind of inside location and another inside location, be it home, office, whatever it might be. When we open up the case, what we find inside is a nice compact set of headphones. Now these are wired, there's no Bluetooth here, so they are definitely a wired headphone only. And in saying that, they use a really cool system where it's a pair of 3.5mm sockets on each cup, but with the wire set up in such a way that it doesn't matter which way you plug theirs in. Now this is actually a really simple wiring system, I assume. What they're doing, as far as I can tell, is using a system where both the left and right plugs carry both the left and right signals. But what I then believe is happening is that on the ear cup itself, the inside contacts will only pick up the signal that's appropriate for the left or the right. What that means is you never have to check which side you're plugging into which, you just plug it in and it's always correct. The LCD-1s aren't the first headphone that have done this. In my understanding, the Audio-Technica ATH R70X that I owned for a little while also did that with their cable. So it's not unique, but it is a really nice feature. I also really like the cable that's provided. It's a nice, solid feeling, cloth-wrapped cable, like so, and it's got really nice details on the end of each plug to make it look a little bit premium without raising the cost of crazy expensive connectors or anything like that. So props to Audeze for making a really nice setup in terms of the agnostic cable sides, and then also making a nice cable that feels the part of a good quality transportable headphone solution. Putting aside the case and the cable for now, let's talk more about the headphones. These are a 90mm planar magnetic headphone, and as I said before, they're completely open. So whilst they're not the most open sounding headphone I've ever heard, there's certainly a lot of leakage in and out of the headphone cups. Despite being a compact design, there's plenty of space, at least for my ears. When I'm wearing the Audeze LCD-1s, I never got the sense that it was compressing my ear or touching my ear in any place. The pads are nice and squishy and soft, and they've got good depth to them and enough size to stay compact but still fit comfortably. As you probably noticed, there's a fair bit of rotation. We've got a few degrees in that direction, and we've got a full 90 degrees in this direction. And then you've also got some, if I can hold it right, some tilting, but not a lot of tilting. However, it's enough tilting. I find these very comfortable to wear for extended periods, and they've actually become my go-to headphone for all of my video conferencing calls. That's partly because they're really comfortable and also really compact. So when you're sitting on screen with the webcam on, you don't look like a goof wearing these great big giant headphones like, say, the Meza Imperiums, which I love, but they look really stupid on a video call. These, on the other hand, look like any other cheap basic headset. Just in case there's any confusion, there's no microphone included with these, so when I'm talking about using these on video calls, it's just using my webcam audio. There's no sound coming from these. These are just so I can hear other people using the headphones instead of my speakers that sometimes cause echoes. So we've got a compact 90mm planar magnetic driver in these really nice, comfortable, compact housings, and it's also, as you've already seen, easy to fold up, put away, and transport around with you. Another thing to note is that these are a 16 ohm headphone, so very low impedance in the scheme of headphones. It's about the same as most IEMs actually. But they're also 99 decibel sensitivity, so they're a little bit more difficult than some other headphones to drive, but nothing that I've found a challenge for any of the devices that I've tried. Being planar magnetic means that they're going to be pretty immune to output impedance issues, so that low impedance isn't going to cause you problems if you happen to have a slightly higher output impedance device. In my testing with these, I found they pretty much sounded identical and performed well from anything I plugged them into. And that includes things like the recently reviewed JDS Labs Element 2, the upcoming Mini I Pro 3, which does have some output impedance issues. I've also used it with the Hugo TT2 and also the Burson Soloist. Across the board, what I heard was exactly what I would expect. So there were no surprises caused by that very low impedance and the various different output impedances of some of those devices, with the Mini I Pro 3 being the most obvious. And that's really important because Audeze clearly are pitching these. If you have a look at the website that I'll link through down below, Audeze are clearly pitching these as a reference type headphone. These are a headphone that they're expecting people to use both for audiophile style listening, whatever you want to make that mean, but more importantly for mixing, mastering and producing audio. And so with that in mind, they need to produce a very consistent sound no matter what they're plugged into. And that's where planars are really excellent because they're immune to the issues of output impedance causing variations in frequency response. That's because planar magnetics have a consistent impedance across the board, and so there's no variations in the amount of power delivered across different frequencies caused by variations in impedance. Now, if that sounded like gobbledygook to you, don't worry, I'm going to explain it in much more detail in an upcoming review. But for now, just know that these will work really nicely with everything you plug them into. And that, of course, now brings us to the sound. The first thing I noticed about the LCD-1s was that they produce a soundstage that is quite narrow, but it's also quite spacious in the sense that it's got lots of space between instruments, even though it's within a narrow overall space. And so what I mean by that is that in its totality, the soundstage is quite small. But it also means that sense of space around instruments means that things don't get congested or feel like everything's too much on top of each other. It does feel like all of the musicians are crammed into a smaller room, but you can still differentiate one instrument and one musician from the next. The width of the soundstage goes just beyond the ears, but it's a really close call. It's not like other headphones that can throw a soundstage that goes significantly outside the head and may even occasionally trick you into thinking sound is coming from outside the headphones entirely. With the LCD-1s, that's probably never going to happen. Whilst the soundstage presentation from the LCD-1s is probably not my personal preference, I never once felt like it was denying me any musical enjoyment. So for me, it's not a reason not to buy them, but it is something to be aware of if you're comparing them to other models, and it's something that maybe you find an absolute deal breaker. The good news is that within that relatively small soundstage, the imaging is very, very good, and the only thing holding it back from being stellar is that it does lack that little bit of space in order to separate the sounds more. As I said, I think it's doing the best it can to keep each individual sound separate, but there is still a limited amount of space in order for it to break those things apart. It does make it coherent, but it also makes it a little bit closed and a little bit tight. Stepping away from soundstage now, the other characteristics of the sound from the LCD ones are a really nice sense of texture and detail, particularly through the mids and upper mids. It doesn't have particularly bright sparkly treble, but there is good treble extension. And the bass is fairly well balanced, but I would probably like just a touch more emphasis down there. It can feel a little bit lean and a little bit dry sometimes, depending on what you're coming from and what you're listening to. As I jumped around between different sources with the LCD one, what I found was that it's definitely a headphone that for me, when I'm thinking about musical enjoyment, it definitely benefits from a slightly warmer amp. So something like the recently reviewed JDS Labs Element 2 was a really nice combination if you're looking for musical enjoyment. Likewise, the TU-8200R that I'm in the process of reviewing was also a great match because of the tubes bringing that little bit of extra weight and richness and sweetness to the mids. With all that said though, if you're looking for a reference sound, you're probably going to want to stick to a more neutral amplifier to get the benefits of the quiet reference tuning of the Audeze LCD-1. Now I'm saying quiet reference because I don't necessarily know what reference should actually be considered to be. Is it a dead flat response? Is it with a slight lift in the bass? It all depends on what you're looking for, what you're used to, and what you're looking to produce. I know for me, these have worked really, really well when editing and EQing my videos. What I'm hearing through the headphones is very consistent to what I hear from my monitors. My monitors do put out just a little bit more bass because of the room that they're in being untreated, and therefore the monitors will sound a touch boomy when the mix sounds just right on the LCD ones. But having listened to the output across multiple headphones and through the TV, through my phone, various other places, I know that the LCD ones are more accurate because my monitors are being adversely affected by the room that we're in. So what that's all saying is that the LCD ones are a great headphone for a basic reference setup. Any serious sound engineer is probably not going to limit their mixing to headphones alone. So I'm not for a second suggesting that you should buy a pair of these and that that's all you'll ever need for all of your mixing and mastering needs, because ultimately they're never going to match a good set of studio monitors. Regardless of the headphone used, you're not going to get the spatial information you need, particularly the depth and sometimes also the width of soundstage that you really need to get your mix just right. If you're just doing vocal work like me, then potentially these could be all you need just to get the right balance in your EQ. So I just want to put them into context. They're not the one and only tool for a music engineer, but they might be just fine for a voiceover artist or other type of vocal engineer. And I'm obviously using the term engineer very loosely here. All I mean is somebody who is tuning and EQing voiceovers and vocals versus someone who's doing music. And so with all that out of the way, in isolation, I would say that these are a wonderful headphone that I thoroughly enjoy for more kind of work-based or work-related type tasks. They're not a headphone I reach for a lot if I'm just listening to music, but they are absolutely the headphone that I've gone to, I reckon 90% of the time for my video calls and a lot of my video editing as well. They're comfortable, they're compact, and they're reference enough to give me an accurate mix. And so with all that in mind, let's now talk about a couple of competitors. I'm going to start below the LCD-1 with the HD560S. So the 560S here I reviewed recently on the channel, and I really liked them for what they are. I think they're an excellent headphone. They do feel a bit cheap. They're also not particularly transportable. This is about as small as they get. If I compress the headband a little bit more, you get maybe a centimetre or two on each side, but ultimately they're more of a desktop style headphone. So the LCD-1s offer a transportable reference sound versus the Sennheiser HD560S offering a more desktop reference sound. I covered this off in my review of the HD560S, so I'm not going to go into lots and lots of detail, but what I found was that for the extra money you're spending on the LCD-1, what you're getting is a headphone that's got a little bit better sense of resolution and detail in the top end. It's also got a little bit more sense of weight and body in the vocals. But at the same time, it has a slightly unnatural timbre in certain vocals, particularly male vocals, towards the upper end of the register. So neither is a perfect headphone in my opinion. They're both very good for reference work. They're not quite as good both for just musical listening and enjoyment, but out of the two, I would lean towards the LCD-1 as the overall more enjoyable headphone. That said, if you're on a budget and you're just looking for a stay-home reference unit, the 560S is probably the choice. If you want something that does a better job at flipping between musical enjoyment and reference sound, then the LCD-1 would be the choice. And of course, if you need to transport it regularly, the LCD-1 is the easy choice. So there is a bit of a price difference, but I do think you're getting a better headphone for your money with the LCD-1. As I said, if you want more detail than that, please do go and check out my review of the HD560S. I'll also put a card at the end of this video that can take you through once you've finished watching what I've got to say here. So I'm going to put these back now and we're going to move over to the HiFi and Sundara. I chose the Sundara for a comparison here because they're in a similar-ish price range, depending on what price the Sundara is selling at the time. And they're also both planar magnetics that are also both, I think, excellent products in their own right. And so it's quite possible you could be looking at both of these. Now immediately in picking them up, what you'll see just in my hands is there's a big difference in size. The Sundara is much more of a full-size headphone. It's not at all transportable. That's as small as it gets once again, like the HD560S. So it's not a transportable headphone in the same way as the LCD-1. They're also set up for quite different usage. The Sundara is a music listener's headphone. It's not intended to be a reference designed headphone. The LCD-1, as I've already covered off, leans much more towards reference first and music listening second, or as Audeze call it, audiophile listening, which I think is their way of saying a more analytical style of listening experience. The Sundara, on the other hand, are all about musical enjoyment, and they do that beautifully. In comparing the two of these side by side across a couple of different sources, what I found was, as you probably expect from what I already said, and particularly if you've already got any familiarity with the Sundara has better bass, better punch, a smoother, richer, warmer overall sound. The LCD-1, on the other hand, is a bit drier, a bit leaner, and that also means that it brings out more textual information and details in the upper registers of the music. In particular, things like the breath in vocals are going to come out much clearer on the LCD-1s than on the Sundaras. Whether that's something you value is all personal preference. I quite like both of these headphones in their own way, but there's clear differences between the two. The soundstage space from the Sundara is much, much better than what you get from the LCD-1. And whilst both image well, that slight lack of space does hold the LCD-1 back in a comparison against the Sundara. Ultimately, the Sundara has a much bigger soundstage and a better overall imaging. The Sundara is beautiful for its imaging qualities, and the LCD-1 just can't keep up due to that lack of space. For me though, the thing that really separates these two is just the enjoyment and engagement factor. And it's a combination of all of those things I've just spoken about. It all comes together to mean that the Sundaras can really groove with a piece of music, whereas the LCD-1s always keep things feeling a little bit artificial and a little bit sterile. As one example, I was listening to Step Right Up by the Constellations. Not a particularly well recorded track, but one that's got plenty of rhythm and drive to it. And what I found in listening to the two was that with the LCD-1s, I was just listening in a fairly detached way to a piece of music. Whereas with the Sundaras, it had me wanting to tap my foot, bob my head, and really groove along with the track. That to me is the ultimate measure of which headphone I prefer, from a musical listening point of view at least, and that's why for me, the Sundara is the choice that I would go for if I was looking for musical enjoyment. For reference though, and for ultimate detail retrieval, particularly in more the upper end of the register, the LCD-1 is still a little bit ahead. And so once again, it comes down to what you need in the headphone. If you're looking to do any kind of reference work, don't think about the Sundara. It's a great headphone, but it's not good for that. The LCD-1 on the other hand is great. If you're just looking for musical enjoyment, I'd say don't really go for the LCD-1 because the Sundara is the absolute winner out of these two. Of course, if you're looking for something that does straddle both, I do think the LCD-1 is probably the way that I would go. It's not as enjoyable, but with a bit of EQing, it probably can get more enjoyable. And I think that some of its technicalities do put it just a little bit ahead of the Sundara, no matter how much you EQ the Sundara. That's not to say the Sundara is a technically poor headphone, but just knowing that I've played with the Sundara using the Sound ID reference curves, I never found that it got to the point where I really felt like I was hearing everything I wanted to within the mix. In the case of the LCD-1 though, whilst I don't get the sense of space that I might like, I did hear all of the details throughout the mix, and I haven't even applied EQ to it. So both are great headphones, and it's going to come down to what you need the headphone to do as to which one I'd recommend. Now, one final comparison that I do want to mention is that I did a thorough comparison between the LCD-1 and the Drop Panda over in the Drop Panda review. So I'm not going to do that one again. The reason I compared the two was that this is an open compact planar, whereas the Panda is a closed compact planar. The Panda is also a Bluetooth headphone, and it's got calibration available now through Sound ID. So they're very different headphones, but if it's something that you're interested in, go over and check out the Panda review for my direct comparisons there. For now though, let's wrap this up by saying that the LCD-1 for me is a really fantastic headphone within a fairly narrow niche. In much the same way as the Loxg D30 won my heart despite having its own flaws, the LCD-1 has done much the same. It's a headphone that I really enjoy using and interacting with. It does what I need it to do just perfectly in terms of being compact, being relatively reference, not too dry and clinical that it's harsh to listen to, but at the same time giving me enough truth that I can get my vocal mixes just right. I think it looks great, and if I was in a position where I had to take a headphone with me, the fact that I can fold it up so small and pop it in this case is a real win as well. So if you're in the market for a bit of a jack of all trades headphone and you're leaning more towards reference than pure musicality, then I think the Audeze LCD-1 is a headphone you should definitely consider. The 560S is also worth having on that list, but it leans even further away from musicality, and therefore for me, the LCD-1 is a better balance point. So consider these in the way that they're intended, which is a reference, audiophile type analytical style listening headphone that's transportable, compact, and very well priced. If that appeals to you, I'll put a link down below where you can go and read up more and grab yourself a pair of LCD-1s. As always, if you found this review useful, I'd love it if you'd hit the like button and the subscribe button because it really helps the channel to grow, to share these videos with you and others like you, and to get more opportunities for more products that I can review and share with you. For now though, I'll leave it to the music, so happy listening and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.